its governance is very often misunderstood in terms of the value that it can bring. People, especially entrepreneurs, are probably the biggest enemy of governance. They think of governance as bureaucracy, as constraints, as things they don't want to do. And I think the message of the course first is to say that at the startup governance, you tailor the governance to the venture. So this is not imposed from the outside. There are some constraints, but there are very few constraints because the founder is sort of pretty much alone, has a little bit of capital. So you can tailor the governance to the venture and to the conditions. And then you gradually move into a more formal setting, which is required by investors. So the worst thing is if you're late, then the constraints will be imposed by the investors or be imposed by outsiders. And this is exactly what the entrepreneur doesn't like. So that's why we say one of the key messages, you need to understand governance from the start. So it's an integral part of a venture. And most of the time it comes as an add-on. Governance is an integral part of the venture and not an add-on.
It's so true that often the governance is being imposed by the investors coming in, and especially when a company scales a lot, they have lots of investors coming in. So it's in the A round, the B round, the C round, and all of them come with different views on governance, and that becomes really, really messy if you haven't figured that out from the start. So
two key notions. Every venture should have a shareholders board. It should have a shareholders agreement, which is why are you in there? What are we pursuing in this venture? And then there should be a shareholders board. Why? Because most shareholders don't agree. And you don't want these disagreements to show up at the board of directors, because the board of directors, the board is there for the venture, is for making a successful venture. And sometimes you have the wrong shareholders. That's a very difficult discussion if the shareholders have a lock on the board and if they dominate the board. So again, one of the key messages is please have an owner's board. You may not call it an owner's board. You should be creative. You're an entrepreneur. Use the names that you like. But the principle is you have a board of owners as distinct from the board of directors, because legally also the board of directors is responsible for the venture, not for the shareholders, but for the venture. They're not against the shareholders, but they're there to make sure that the venture succeeds. And for the venture to succeed, shareholders must trust the venture, and the board is the trust instrument. I think the logical conclusion is that you should have an owner's board, you should have you have shareholders agreements, and you should know what does each shareholder want from the venture. Because value creation in an entrepreneurial firm is not a share price increase because the firm is not listed. And because also, even if it's listed, share price is not the same as value creation. The real question is, what do you want out of the venture? That is the objective, the purpose, and value creation is making progress on the purpose. So of a startup, I mean, it's a restart because it actually was bankrupt and then we took it back. And this is a difficult thing to get right, and you should get it right from the beginning. And I think this is where the 2-day course is really almost a must, for entrepreneurs, because it's not much time. You get the key principles, you get to discuss. You're also not alone. You're discussing with other entrepreneurs. And as I said, the most important thing is to have a governance philosophy from the start. And philosophy has 2 words, which is Sophia, which is the intelligence, the wisdom, and then the philos. You must actually love governance. And this is, I think, the first emotional problem. Entrepreneurs hate governance. A network of entrepreneurs is useful because one of the things that people can take away from the course is meeting other entrepreneurs who could be invited as board members, or even as co-investors, a big part of your life, because for entrepreneurs, this is a big part of your life. You don't go to a big part of your life without education, without training. And this is really minimal training.
I mean, to your point, I mean, the kind of allergy that entrepreneurs have for governance, because they think it's bureaucracy. But in the end, it will be imposed some way by the
Yes.
investors. They will impose it on you, and then you're in a much worse situation. And typically, what then happens is CEO replacements and stuff like that, which tend to be very, very messy. And in the course, we'll go into that as well, how to actually deal with that kind of situation, and ideally, well, prevent those kind of situations. I think it's fantastic opportunity, as Ludo said, also to exchange views and experiences between different entrepreneurs. And also we'll have a panel of investors, so we get the investor perspective. It's not just the founder's perspective, but you have to really combine all those different perspectives.
You should always set up the board for the future, not for the past, I think. That is very, very important. Then board work becomes sort of a dynamic exercise, and which is typically changing. You might say, every 6 months or in the beginning, is this the right board? Should I change the board? Or should I have new members? And then board members will suggest and will bring new members, or will bring investors. So I think the board is the first circle. It's like, Jesus and the apostles, it's the apostles of the venture. And they bring the news to other people. Very important.
How do you actually convince then investors to build a governance that is different from what they are normally doing, not putting a board member when they put a big ticket? I was the CEO and the chairman of the board. I was the founder, and I was also the VP of sales. So I was wearing far too many hats, and that gets you into a difficult situation, because then you're not a very effective chairman, and you are basically often in a conflictive situation. Another thing we'll discuss in the course, and I think it's a very interesting topic too, is where investors actually play executive roles, and that actually happens quite a bit, where executives executive functions are filled by investors, which is also very quickly leading to governance issues and potentially value destruction.
Principles are not necessarily rigid rules, but principles are guidelines, and say you should keep them in mind. That governance is not execution. So if board members take executive roles, then they should go to the other side of the river, and say, okay, now I'm an executive, because otherwise you're going to start judging yourself. And we're always either too hard on ourselves or we're too soft on ourselves, but we're rarely objective. And this is where I feel when the board members take on executive roles, they're not seen as other executives. So the conversation is not fair. So they don't necessarily give feedback. So in Bart's example, then people in the management go to Bart and say, what's this guy doing? He's the head of marketing, but he's also a board member. So they don't really dare to tell him the truth. And if you don't tell the truth, then it's eventually going to be a problem.
The process on how you run a board, and Ludo is an expert on the fair process. That's something, how do we actually run board meetings in a very, very effective way? And that's something we also cover in the course, because it's a very simple process, but very, very few actually apply it. It's incredible how much value it creates and how simple it is, but at the same time, most boards don't implement it, most companies don't implement it, and this is something we'll also explain in a lot more detail.
Business is complex, but the governance should be simple, especially in entrepreneurial. My final word would be that, all of us involved in Ukraine, are working, contributing, and looking forward, like you, for the new Ukraine, And the new Ukraine will have a lot of opportunities, I think, but of course, there must be an exit of the war. There must be hopefully a good exit of the war. But the new Ukraine, will actually offer a lot of entrepreneurial ventures. So this is a good time to take the course. That would be my final message. And it's not a luxury. It's more like a Skoda than like an Audi. It's not luxury we're selling. It's the Skoda, or it's a basic Volkswagen. The car of the people. It's the governance of the entrepreneur that we're teaching about. It's not the governance of fancy companies, etc.
In my case, I mean, personally, I mean, in the first venture, governance was very costly. The fact that it went wrong, I think it was at least a 25 million euro.
Yeah, and this is, I think,
This is
one of the uniqueness of this course,
Mhm.
is that, you know, participants will be able to learn from errors that Bart made. He also did some good things, of course. And I think this is rare that somebody like Bart comes forward and admits, you know, to have made mistakes, and then turns it around and say, you know, at least that venture did not succeed, but at least let others learn from my venture.